Hello students, welcome to week 7 for COM 340. This week we are looking at material related to visual persuasion and how that relates to rhetoric and some of the things that we have been doing within the course. So the week 7 agenda calls us to read chapters 13 and 14 of the course text. We're also watching 2 videos that are related to visual literacy as well as visual persuasion, which should be very helpful with you in developing your critical assignments as well as working through the course content this week. This week you are completing discussion board number 7 that is due on Friday, as well as the replies for discussion board number 7 that are due on Sunday. So do keep in mind discussion board number 7 has 2 deadlines, one on Friday for your original post and one on Sunday for your reply posts. In addition to that, we are wrapping up one of our last aspects of the persuasive campaign plan before our critical assignment is due next week in its entirety, and that's your message strategy presentation reflection. It's a reflection on the process of creating your message strategy. So we'll be working through some of those things this week. Discussion board number 7 asks you to write no less than 300 words and no less than 150 words on your replies, looking at what you would do is if you were coaching a local political candidate who may be seeking a seat on the city council, what advice would you give them, and what analytical ability would you provide them to be able to persuade the community members to vote for them? How could you also use some visual persuasive tactics potentially help the campaign? So provide an overall summative response and how you would use persuasive communication as well as rhetoric to persuade community members to vote for the political candidate in a local community. In addition, keep in mind how this week's content of visual persuasive tactics could potentially help them as well. The message strategy reflection assignment asks you to write 1 to 2 pages in APA format that describes your presentation that you presented last week, as well as discussing the content of your presentation, why you chose the information, and how this was central to your message strategy, in addition to identifying some persuasive communication that was relative to your campaign and message strategy, and lastly, providing a reflection of the learning process. So it's only about a 1 to 2 page paper that I'm looking for to some key points that I want to see is that there was a learning process here and being able to create a visual presentation for your message strategy to see how it's related to your critical assignment. So I'm looking for your overall reflection and thoughts on the assignment, yes, but primarily I'm looking to see what did you learn from this type of assignment. So keep that in mind. To go over some brief things with visual persuasion, you'll see here some visual persuasive campaign posters that were used. We'll get to in a second, but I wanted to discuss here with you some tactics from some visual persuasion tactics, as well as the importance of visual imagery within rhetoric. It's important to know that most images within communication campaigns are naturally persuasive. In fact, visual images as a whole, in totality of their own self, are truly persuasive in any persuasive form of communication. In fact, most persuasive messages, which I'm mainly referring to as advertising and in fact rhetoric of almost any kind, make extensive use of various forms of visuals and images throughout their campaigns. Many communication scholars think that a visual image is often a more leading element than its verbal counterpart or its written counterpart in the process of persuasion and in the use of rhetoric. So it's important to know that visual messages easily grabs people's attentions and effectively affects their emotion. With these benefits in mind, many people use visual images as persuasive tools. For example, the right visual image and its emotional impact are important to the success of all product and service advertising messages. We even see this in political campaigns. Attention-grabbing and memorable campaign graphics can make a name stand out in a crowded field. On top of that, the visual images offer the best way of imparting complex information on the audience in a short period of time. It can transcend language barriers, stimulate interest in subjects considered dry, and accurately and accessibly record technology that might otherwise be forgotten. Right now, within the scholarly world, most of the interest related to visual persuasion or visual rhetoric marks a stark cultural reality for our time. Visual images have, at no other time in history, become a prominent means of transmitting information to people through the use of technology. Think about smartphones and social media and things like that. So it's even more important today, understanding the use of visuals and images to communicate and how they can be persuasive. It's also apparent, though, that scholars have found that more extensive and sophisticated studies are needed to show and see how this really happens and occurs. It's important that we look at the influence of visual imagery and how it only leaves the impression that a great deal of impact is made when a visual is seen within a persuasive campaign. So it's important to keep some of these things in mind as we go through visual persuasion. It's important to know that when we look at some of these things, I wanted to show you these samples of campaigns here. So the one in the middle that says reach for a lucky instead of a sweet was a very rhetoric prone PR campaign in the 1920s and teens that was derived from Edward Bernays, one of the fathers of PR, that was hired by Lucky Strike cigarettes to help their brand and build awareness among those that may be inclined to smoke. Now remember, in the 20s and 30s, smoking was a sign of prestige and it was socially acceptable and all of those things. So Bernays, he's known as the father of PR, one of and strategic communication, one of the most profound strategic communicators of his time, decided he was going to target women. And they knew that nicotine was often used as an appetite suppressant. So he utilized those two things to brand Lucky Strike cigarettes for women. And through the time that Lucky Strike was in its existence, it was known as a women's cigarette. And so he used visual images and posters to help convey that. And this is a sample of that here. The one that you see of the hearts that states white, black, and yellow was created for a diversity campaign by United Colors of Benton, a clothing brand, to illustrate that regardless of what color our skin is, our hearts are all the same regardless of the skin tone that we may have. It's very visually striking and very visually persuasive by looking at it. The polar bear poster also provides some persuasive elements. Looking at it, you can see there may be some issues here with global warming and ice caps and things like that by showing this polar bear stranded on this particular piece of ice in the middle of the Arctic. Now, to the measures of which the polar bear actually arrived at being in that situation are not shown within that cropped image, but it is visually persuasive and striking to include in some type of global warming campaign, if you were to do that. Now, to keep this in mind, we're going to look again at logos, pathos, and ethos, because logos, pathos, and ethos relate directly to these images here. So if we keep that in mind, our visual appeal and our visual persuasive elements all derive from these three things. We are either looking at it solely from a logic, reason, or proof idea from a visual perspective, not necessarily in verbal communication, or we're looking at it from a pathos perspective. What is the emotional appeal and value it provides to me? Or we're looking at it at an ethos perspective. What is the credibility and trust that this image provides to me to be visually persuasive? Those are the three main things that visual persuasion and using rhetoric with images typically comes from. So keep that in mind as you're planning some things with your critical assignment and working through the course material this week. To wrap up, we're working on chapters 13 and 14, watching 2 videos on visual persuasion and literacy, as well as completing discussion board number 7 and our message strategy presentation reflection. I pray you all have a blessed week, and if you have any questions, let me know. I look forward to interacting with you. God bless.